Good afternoon. Welcome to Trending Points, where we talk about issues that are trending in the town, Rivers State. Today on the show, on the talking point, we have Professor Chief Festus Oguche, and he's going to speak to us about, like I said, trending issues happening around us now. You're welcome, Chief.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
I hope I pronounced your name properly.
Yes, Chief Festus Oguche.
Okay.
Yes.
Please, can we meet you, sir?
Yes, I'm Chief Festus Oguche. I'm a traditional chief of Igala Kingdom in Kogi State. I'm also a legal practitioner practicing here in Port Harcourt, and I'm engaged in several social advocacy matters. I'm a commentator on public issues and vigorously in in an activist position with regards to human rights. I exert a lot of activism there in that area.
Because I recall you have won several awards within and outside the country.
Yes, several, so many of them.
You're welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so we're going to start with the issues around the local government tenure extension. What's your take on that, sir?
Well, I think the controversy generated quite some furore here as to the power of the House of Assembly to unilaterally extend that tenure and the power of the governor to back off from giving his assent to it, and a whole lot of heads were knocked together on that issue. As at that time, some of us were very ardent in our position that the position of the House of Assembly is still constitutionally invalid. I do not think that extension was properly done under the provisions of the Constitution. I would have thought that probably if their tenure had ended, they'll have simply, gone for fresh elections, at least to give it some bit of constitutional backing in line with Section 7 of the 1999 Constitution. But that extension also presupposes that the executive or the legislature has imposed itself on the will of the people, which cannot be done in a constitutional framework. Ordinarily, it is not for the legislature to give blanket approval of extension without recourse to the people. Section 7 of the 1999 Constitution, as amended, states that a democratically elected local government shall at all times be maintained. And the Constitution is very emphatic on that, using mandatory language. And it is not for the legislature in a constitutional democracy to extend any tenure, except it is made subject to the approval of the people, either by way of plebiscite, either by way of a referendum. But pundits argue that there's nothing like a referendum in our constitution. But you have to look into the constitution to see where it is written before you apply it. The entirety of constitutionalism, the entirety of democracy hover around the principles of a referendum, how the people's choice will prevail. That is the whole essence of sovereignty, because the government derives its authority, its power from the will of the people. In that wise, I will say that it was a wrong move by the House of Assembly, properly so called as at that time, and it's something I should not even say one bit. So I am not surprised that it was set aside by a court of competence, and I think that what is important is that a constitutional order be maintained at all costs. We cannot have half-hearted constitutional moves or moves that do not dovetail with constitutional principles or democratic traditions. There must always be that notion, not just a notion alone now, but that principle which is applicable in every constitutional democracy, that the will of the people must always prevail.
Thank you so much. For us that are laymen, you talked about the Constitution a lot, and drawing for what you just said, I think they will say he who has ears should hear. So let's move to economic issues now, because we've talked about legal issues. How would you rate the governor, that's Siminalayi Fubara's economic policy so far? If we're talking about his 1 year in office.
Yes, it will not be a very good, in fairness to myself, to do an assessment of his economic drive. There hasn't been much of a drive. I think it's since he came into office, it's been distractions here and there. They took off quite handsomely with um, uh, the launching of the metro road.
Okay,
What do you
for
call
the
it?
subsidy during that fuel crisis, the internal transit, mass transit
Mass
for,
transit system
yes.
and a whole lot of other palliatives that he brought. I know that within the community where I live, people received a lot of palliatives to ease or cushion the hallucinating effect and the excruciating poverty that came in with the removal of fuel subsidy. I doubt if people are getting adjusted to it yet. And except that, I think there hasn't been much in the area of human capital development flowing from the era of Wiki. Wiki totally ignored that sector, and I'm not surprised that Fubara did not push into that or integrate the economic policy into that immediately, because I can tell you that in spite of the large amount of wealth that hovers around and billions that people hear, there's hunger in the land. It's not River State is not an exception. It's a feature that has become very trans-Nigerian, pan-Nigerian, so to speak. And I think something be done in that direction. In spite of that, I guess the governor, if he had been allowed some bit of ease and opportunity, he had some good policies on ground. I'm sure he must be thinking about some of them, which, if he puts it together, will create a very beautiful economic atmosphere for the people of River State. The only thing also is the distractions he was facing from the end of the controversy with the House of Assembly, the controversy with Governor Wike, all the issues surrounding it. It was almost promoted to the ground, and I was just surprised that he was able to get out of it and bounce back into asserting his position as the executive governor of Rivers State. I know to a large extent that aside from the palliatives, there's been some very good policies I gather coming from the judiciary, the judicial end, and some from the urbanization, the urban planning, and so many other things that they have put on ground on enlarging the scope, expanding the scope of revenue generation for River State, which I think is laudable. Though we've not seen much result on the ground, apparently because he has not settled. He hasn't. A whole 1 year had been wasted pursuing nothing, and it's not his fault because he found himself entrapped in the midst of strongholds that are even more powerful than you can ever think of. And beginning to wonder how the young man could get out of it. Some of us will sleep in the late hours of the night and begin to think, how do we contribute by our activism to get this man out of this terrible debt and hole that they kept him. Thank God is emerging gradually. I think the political issues have to be solved so that he can sit down and begin now to churn out the policies he has for the people. The people must be key in every policy of government, particularly in a constitutional democracy, because that's where it comes from. That's where the power, the authority, their reign emanates from. And I think he's very much on the side of people. He has seen the kind of support he's getting from the people. It's massive. And people do not even want to bother how he emerged as governor because we all know what happened. People are now more interested in making sure that he succeeds. And the only thing he can do for the people is to take it back to them, give it back to them. To whom much is given, much is expected.
Okay, so now, drawing from what you just said, the Trans-Calabari Road
Mm.
was flagged off yesterday, and he said it was going to cost 227 billion, and the timeline will be 30 months. So would you describe that as a people-oriented project?
The Trans-Calabari Road, it's one road that is very, very important, not just for River State, for the development of the country. I feel amazed that this road had been left in that position till this moment. That is where the wealth of the country is coming from. I mean, the bountiful wealth of the country. It's interconnected with Bonny and all the Niger Delta states where you get your oil and gas. It's even something that should be a challenge to the federal government, much more important than the road they are constructing from Calabar to Lagos, as far as I am concerned. You know, and it's coming at the right time because the governor had thought deeply about it. The budget is huge, but it's worth it. And I commend Governor Sim Fubara for taking the bull by the horns because we've had successive governments in Rivers State, governors, in Rivers State presidents, most of whom had ignored that road and left it just like that. That it takes one to ride in a boat to crisscross the base of the Niger Delta, which, as far as I'm concerned, is wrong. So for that, I give Sim Fubara a huge kudos. I commend him totally and completely, and I tell him that that's the best thing he had ever done. I know that after that, he go into more massive developmental projects, which will establish his roots as the people's governor. As far as I'm concerned, he's the one that has taken the bull by the horns very, very clearly, and I commend him for that. That road will generate a lot of good and income for River State. It will also make sure that the oil sector is moving and is bouncing. It also makes sure that the people of the Calabar area, who are the ones that feed the country with their own natural wealth, will not go home thinking that, well, we've been marginalized, we've been maligned or kept sidelined by the political evil that they call marginalization or whatever you call it. But as far as I'm concerned, this Trans-Calabari Road is one that should succeed. It must succeed. Everybody must be supportive of that venture. And we give kudos to the governor for taking that bull by the horns.
Okay, so my last question would be your evaluation of his 1 year in office, which already you've given him a thumbs up. So what advice will you have for him going forward?
Yes, my advice for him, first of all, is that he has to be strong. Once you are surrounded by hawks, you make sure you have a very good points of termination, points of saying no to certain things, points of disagreeing. You don't just fall into line because you want to please some people. I wasn't really impressed initially when you said that they had to enter into that agreement, which Mr. President got,
Peace deal.
the peace deal. For the purposes of peace, you don't engage an illegal procedure to attain a legal end. At the end of the day, to be garbage in, garbage out. Now, exactly what some of us were saying, that advocating that time, that look, anything that is worth doing is worth doing well. If you're operating by the Constitution, you must abide by the Constitution. At no time will I ever agree, as far as I'm concerned, that instrument is worth the while. It's a worthless piece of document. So he has to be astute and be strong, not for himself, but for the people of River State. Stand his ground and make sure that things go in accordance with the rules of governance, with the principles of democracy, with the fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policy, that the constitutional provisions are upheld. Because he should remind himself at all times that he swore an oath to uphold the provisions of the Constitution. That is the Bible we have. Whatever legitimacy there is attached to the Constitution or not is immaterial. It doesn't matter. So long as it is the operative ground norm, you should stand by it. There have been so many distractions for the young man, though inexperienced to some extent, but he's been able to steer the waters, to steer the ship away from the octopus and the sharks, which is very important. So I give him kudos for that. How he's been able to carry on that way, beats my imagination, but I think it's something that is worthy of commendation. The economic policy, the outlook that I'm saying is going to be very, very beautiful. I'm sure he will go into taking care of the inner roads, developmental projects, housing projects. Electricity is very, very important. The gas turbines. We now have an ambience where the states can generate their own electricity successive administrations, Rivers State have been talking gas to buy for 10 whole years, for another 10 years, another 8 years, and nothing is forthcoming. A lot of communities are without light. I think he can still take the bull by the horns from that perspective and move the states towards generation of electricity 24 hours. Other states are doing it. And River State has all the potential, all the resources, and everything you can think of, the technology. See how I can revive some of those companies that we are rendered redundant. I think the Amechi government created a lot of those. There's one at Omoku, which, while on my way to court at Omoku those days, we used to see it, an agricultural project, very elaborate. There's a fisheries industry in the Buguma. There's another one in the Ogoni area. These are commendable moves by these reasonable people, responsible people, to give something back to society, that their wealth is not wasted. We've had so much allocations to River State. If you put your head down and consider the amount of money that's been allocated to River State since 1999, my sister, it is sufficient to develop the whole of Latin America, from Uruguay to Argentina to Brazil. But what is on ground to show for it? Nothing. We have to tell ourselves the truth. Call a spade a spade. So Governor Fubara will do a lot to revive these industries that have been left comatose. Some of them are totally being killed. Industrialization is very, very important, because the